Imagine an army of 60,000 soldiers marching through your land, not just to fight, but to destroy everything in sight. Farms burned, railroads torn apart, towns left in ashes. No one could stop them. This is not fiction. This happened, and one man ordered all of it. The year is 1864. The American Civil War has been dragging on for 3 brutal years. Hundreds of thousands are already dead. The North is exhausted. The South is desperate. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a Union general named William Tecumseh Sherman is about to make a decision so radical, so ruthless, so controversial that people are still arguing about it more than 150 years later. Was he a military genius who shortened the war and, in doing so, actually saved lives? Or was he a destroyer of the worst kind, a man who terrorized innocent civilians and left a trail of ash and ruin across an entire region? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what happened, why Sherman did it, and why this march changed the way wars are fought forever. If you have ever wanted to understand one of the most debated military campaigns in American history, stay right here, because this story is far more complicated than you think. Hit that subscribe button because this is the kind of history that actually matters. William Tecumseh Sherman was born on February 8, 1820 in Lancaster, Ohio. His father died when he was just 9 years old, and Sherman was taken in by Thomas Ewing, a powerful lawyer and future U.S. Senator who lived nearby. The name Tecumseh came from the famous Shawnee warrior chief, a name that carried the spirit of war long before Sherman ever fired a single shot. He entered the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1836. He was not a celebrated student. He finished 6th in his class of 1840 and ranked dead last in discipline. Even then, Sherman was a man who thought for himself and played by his own rules. After West Point, he served in the Second Seminole War and later in the Mexican-American War, but he never saw serious combat during those years. He grew restless and frustrated. In 1853, Sherman left the Army and tried banking in San Francisco. He failed. He tried law in Kansas. He failed again. He then took a position as superintendent of a military academy in Louisiana, the institution that would later become Louisiana State University, and that he was genuinely good at. But then, 1861 arrived and everything changed. When the southern states began to secede from the Union, Sherman was torn. He had lived in the South. He had friends in the South. He respected Southern culture, but he believed in the United States of America as one nation above all else, and he believed secession was nothing short of treason. He resigned his Louisiana post and returned north to serve the Union. The war that would define him had begun. Sherman's early war experience was not glorious. At the First Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, Union forces collapsed in a disorganized and humiliating rout. Sherman was there, and the chaos rattled him deeply. In the months that followed, he sent increasingly anxious and alarmed reports to Washington. Newspapers began to call him mentally unstable. He was briefly relieved of his command. It was one of the lowest points of his life. But then Sherman met Ulysses S. Grant, and everything changed. The two men bonded over a shared belief that war could not be won gently. At the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862, Sherman was shot twice and had 2 horses killed beneath him. He refused to leave the field. Grant noticed. A partnership that would ultimately win the Civil War was born in the blood and mud of Shiloh, Tennessee. By 1864, Sherman was commanding all Union forces in the Western Theater. His assignment was to capture Atlanta, Georgia, the industrial and railroad hub of the Confederacy. After months of brutal maneuvering and combat across Georgia and Tennessee, Sherman's forces entered Atlanta on September 2, 1864. The city fell. The North erupted in celebration. President Abraham Lincoln's re-election, which had looked genuinely uncertain, was now all but secured. But Sherman was not celebrating, because Atlanta was never the real goal. He already had something far bigger and far bolder in mind. After taking Atlanta, Sherman proposed something that stunned even his own commanders. He wanted to abandon his supply lines entirely, take 60,000 men, and march them 300 miles southeast through the heart of Georgia to the port city of Savannah on the Atlantic coast. No resupply wagons, no communication lines back to Washington, no safety net of any kind, just an army moving fast, living off the land, and systematically destroying everything the Confederacy needed to keep fighting. Even Ulysses S. Grant was hesitant. President Lincoln was nervous. The plan looked like madness on paper, but Sherman's argument was cold, clear, and logical. He told Grant that the Confederate army in the field could only survive if it had food, railroads, factories, and, critically, the will of the Southern people behind it. Destroy all of that, cut the Confederacy's economic arteries, shatter civilian morale, and the South would have no choice but to collapse from within. Sherman called this approach hard war, not war against soldiers alone, war against an entire system, its infrastructure, its supply chain, its psychological foundation. He said plainly, war is cruelty, and you cannot refine it. He was not speaking metaphorically. Grant gave his approval. Lincoln trusted Grant. And on November 15, 1864, Sherman ordered Atlanta set on fire, destroying anything of military value, and began his march. The sky behind them was black with smoke as 60,000 Union soldiers moved southeast from Atlanta in 4 massive columns, spread across a corridor roughly 60 miles wide. Sherman issued Special Field Orders number 120 before leaving, the formal rules governing the march. Soldiers were authorized to forage liberally from the countryside. They were not officially ordered to burn civilian homes or commit acts of terror, but the orders left enormous room for interpretation, and in practice, what happened on the ground was far from orderly. The army moved fast, 10 to 15 miles per day. Soldiers tore up railroad tracks, heated them over bonfires, and bent the softened iron around tree trunks, rendering them permanently unusable. These twisted rails became known as Sherman's neckties. The railroads that fed Confederate armies in Virginia and the Carolinas were being methodically destroyed mile by mile. Advance units called bummers, unofficial foragers who rode ahead of the main columns, swept through plantations, farms, and small towns, seizing food, livestock, and supplies. Some conducted themselves within the letter of Sherman's orders, many did not. Smokehouses were emptied, livestock were slaughtered or driven off, cotton gins were burned, mills were destroyed. And despite the official prohibition, private homes went up in flames with disturbing regularity. As the army moved deeper into Georgia, something else remarkable happened. Thousands of enslaved black men, women, and children, seeing Sherman's army as the arrival of freedom, began following the columns. At the height of the march, tens of thousands trailed behind the Union forces. It was one of the largest spontaneous movements of people in American history to that point. Confederate resistance was real, but scattered and overwhelmed. The forces available to defend Georgia simply could not stop an army of this size moving this fast across this much territory. Week after week, the march continued, county after county. The Confederacy's breadbasket was being carved in half, but not everything that happened on that march was strategic and calculated. There is a darker story running alongside the military one, and it cannot be ignored. Looting frequently went far beyond any military justification. Soldiers took jewelry, silverware, and family heirlooms that had no bearing whatsoever on the Confederate war effort. Civilians, the majority of them women, children, and elderly, since the men were off at war, were left with nothing. Some families buried their valuables in the yard the night before the army arrived. Some hid food in wells. Many still lost everything. One of the most haunting moments of the entire march came at Ebenezer Creek in December 1864. A Union general named Jefferson C. Davis, no relation to Confederate President Jefferson Davis, ordered his soldiers across a pontoon bridge over the creek, then had the bridge raised behind them, deliberately stranding thousands of freed black men, women, and children on the opposite bank, with Confederate cavalry closing in. Many drowned attempting to swim across. The incident was a moral stain on the march that no military outcome can erase. Southern newspapers called Sherman a monster. Confederate leaders called him a barbarian. The outrage was genuine and lasting. But historians have also noted an uncomfortable counterpoint. Compared to comparable military campaigns elsewhere in the world during the same era, Sherman's march caused remarkably few civilian deaths. The deliberate targeting of an economy and infrastructure rather than the mass killing of people was, in a grim and specific way, a form of calculated restraint. Sherman himself consistently held that destroying the South's ability to make war was more effective and less murderous than continued frontal assaults on its armies. History has never agreed on a clean verdict, and Sherman never asked for one. On December 21st, 1864, 36 days and approximately 300 miles after leaving Atlanta, Sherman's army reached Savannah, Georgia. The Confederate forces defending the city were vastly outnumbered and knew it. They evacuated quietly during the night of December 20th. When Union soldiers entered Savannah the next morning, the city surrendered without a major battle. Sherman sent a now famous telegram to President Lincoln. "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." Lincoln wrote back with undisguised joy, calling the achievement one that would go down in history. The nation was stunned. Sherman had marched an army through the heart of enemy territory with no supply line, cut the Confederacy in half, destroyed its economic backbone, and captured a major Atlantic port, and done it in just over a month. The psychological impact on the Southern population was profound and immediate. If 60,000 Union soldiers could march from Atlanta to the sea with no one able to stop them, the war was visibly, undeniably lost. Confederate morale, already battered, began to collapse in earnest. Sherman then turned his army north into the Carolinas, where the destruction continued with even greater intensity. South Carolina, the first state to secede, felt the full weight of the Union advance. On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The Civil War was effectively over. Just over 2 weeks later, on April 26, 1865, Sherman accepted the surrender of Confederate General Joseph Johnston in North Carolina, the largest single surrender of the entire war. Historians have consistently argued that Sherman's march significantly accelerated the end of the conflict by destroying Georgia's and South Carolina's railroads, food production, and manufacturing capacity, and by demonstrating to ordinary Southern civilians that the Confederate government could not protect them. Sherman removed the material and psychological foundations the South needed to continue fighting. The war that Sherman shortened almost certainly would have cost hundreds of thousands more lives had it dragged on through another year of conventional combat. Sherman's concept of total war, the deliberate targeting of an enemy's entire war-making capacity, not just its armies, became the foundational blueprint for modern warfare. The strategies used by both sides in World War I, the Allied campaigns in World War II, and virtually every major conflict of the 20th century draw directly on the principles Sherman practiced in Georgia in the autumn of 1864. He was celebrated in the North as one of the greatest military commanders in American history. In the South, his name was cursed for generations, and in many places, still is. Sherman died on February 14, 1891 in New York City at the age of 71. At his funeral, the man who stood as one of his pallbearers was Confederate General Joseph Johnston, the same man Sherman had relentlessly pursued across Georgia and the Carolinas just 26 years earlier. It was February and bitterly cold. Johnston stood in the rain without a hat, refusing to cover his head as a mark of respect. Friends urged him to put something on. Johnston reportedly said, "If I were in his place and he were standing here in mine, he would not put on his hat." Johnston caught pneumonia at that funeral. He died 1 month later. A Union general, a Confederate general, an old war, 2 old enemies, and a quiet and unrequested grace between them. It may say more about both men than any battle ever did. Sherman's march remains one of the most studied, debated, and morally contested military campaigns in all of American history. It raises questions with no comfortable answers. When is it justified to destroy civilian infrastructure in war? Where is the line between military necessity and war crime? Can a commander be both ruthless and right at the same time? These questions were not settled in 1864. They are asked again every time a modern army wages war on an enemy's economy, power grid, or supply chain. They are being asked today. William Tecumseh Sherman did not want to be a hero. He turned down offers to run for president multiple times. He famously said, "If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve." He did not want a monument. He did not seek forgiveness. He wanted the war to end, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, even if history judged him harshly for it. And that is exactly what makes this story impossible to forget. There is no clean villain. There is no simple hero. There is just a man, a war, a decision, and 300 miles of burning Georgia pine. Whether you believe Sherman was a military genius or a ruthless destroyer, one thing is absolutely certain. The world he left behind was forever changed. And the questions he raised have never stopped being relevant. If this video gave you a new way of thinking about history, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep making stories like this one. And if you want to go even deeper into the Civil War era, the next video is already queued up for you. Just click and we will see you there.